At the class reunion, everyone started chanting, egging Sandra on to go kiss Stanley. Blushing, she leaned in and kissed him. Stanley didn't pull away. Instead, he deepened the kiss, fiercely. The crowd erupted in cheers. No one knew that Stanley and I had been married for 4 years. After the party, he drove the drunken Sandra home, leaving me to walk the nearly deserted streets alone. He didn't come home that night. The next day, there were several strawberry-colored bite marks on his neck. 6 months ago, Stanley started seeing another girl. It was Sandra, the same Sandra he once claimed to despise. I had loved him, chased him, been with him for nearly a decade. Married for 4 years, I was always the one taking the initiative. He always believed I could never leave him. But now I finally understood, it was time to let go. Chapter 1. At the high school reunion, glasses clinked, and the room was filled with laughter, jokes, and teasing. Stanley sat beside me, neither too close, nor too far. He downed one drink after another, his eyes heavy and dim beneath the haze of alcohol, as if time had turned into thin, sharp blades. Cold and distant as always. I knew he was angry. But his mood had nothing to do with me. I followed his gaze, it landed squarely on Sandra, seated at the opposite end of the table. She always had a quiet, demure air about her. Maybe it was the alcohol, but tonight her fair, porcelain face was tinged with a delicate blush, making her look especially alluring. Beside her, Kevin kept offering her food, trying to strike up conversation. She occasionally smiled back at him. I knew, and Stanley knew too, back in the day, Kevin had a thing for Sandra. But somehow, no one really rooted for Neil and Sandra as a couple. After a few more rounds of drinks, someone suggested a game of truth or dare. Sandra lost a round, and the group burst into excitement. Sandra, quick. Go kiss Stanley.
Yeah.
Go on. Don't chicken out. You lost the game, no backing out now. Amid teasing, claps, and encouragement, the group pushed Sandra toward him. She was tipsy, her face flushed, and she stood up hesitantly, unsure whether to go. One of the girls gave her a little shove, pushing her toward Stanley. She stumbled, nearly falling into him, but Stanley caught her by the waist and steadied her. That only made the crowd louder. Kiss him. Kiss him. With the noise rising around her, Sandra lowered her head and carefully pressed her lips to his. Everyone held their breath. The chemistry between the two of them had always been complicated. Everyone knew, if Stanley didn't like her, he wouldn't care about saving face. But this time, he didn't push her away. He paused only for a moment. Just as Sandra was about to pull away, Stanley raised his hand and pressed the back of her head, his fingers tangling into her inky black hair as he deepened the kiss, hard. The corners of his eyes were tinged with red, whether from the alcohol or from some desperate longing, I couldn't tell. Around them, the room erupted into cheers and loud applause. Somewhere in the chaos, I vaguely heard someone say, "Is my old ship finally sailing for real?" I stared at the wine glass on the glass table, watching the deep red liquid sway gently with the shifting lights above, its dizzying reflections making my head spin. Everyone here knew I had chased Stanley all through our school years. But no one knew we had been married for 4. I couldn't even blame them for shipping Stanley and Sandra. Their story really was more dramatic than mine with him. The more antagonistic, the more like star-crossed lovers they seemed. I remembered back in high school, there were already whispers about them. People shipping the two of them in secret. Back then, I had even asked him about it with a joking smile. People say you and Sandra make a great pair. Do you like her? Stanley had stopped writing, his eyes full of disdain. Of all the people in the world, I'd never like her. Don't even mention her name, it makes me sick. He hated Sandra because her father was the man who broke up Stanley's parents' marriage. He had always blamed Sandra's father for the divorce. Later, Stanley's mom and Sandra's dad actually got married, forming a new family. From that point on, the two of them loathed each other. But Stanley hated her even more. Even after 3 years, when that blended family eventually fell apart, Sandra had already begun to let go of her hostility, but Stanley still refused to speak her name. I still remember his birthday. He accepted gifts from everyone, except Sandra. He slapped away the small cake she brought him, sending her storming off in tears. And on her birthday, he was even crueler. While everyone wrote sweet birthday wishes, he gave her just one sentence. May everything you love fall to pieces. It made her cry on the spot. I never would have guessed. So all along, he liked her. Chapter 2. The noise around me was overwhelming. So loud that all I could hear was a constant ringing in my ears. I couldn't make out a single word anymore. The lights above were blinding, and the clinking of glasses, laughter, and teasing crashed together in waves. For a moment, I couldn't even tell if I was dreaming or awake. Eventually, as the night wore on and stars scattered across the sky, people finally began to leave in 2s and 3s. Sandra was drunk. Someone nudged her toward Stanley. Stanley, Sandra's yours to take care of tonight. He caught her and helped her toward his car. She kept murmuring along the way. No one could make out what she was saying, but her unsteady body leaned heavily against his. He tucked her into the passenger seat. Just as he bent over to climb in. He still hadn't noticed me. Under the streetlight, the two of them were silhouetted like a couple out of a storybook, two lovers who had been through hell and come out the other side, closer than ever. I stood under another streetlight, just across the road, and called his name. Stanley. He paused, as if only just remembering that I existed, then turned his head to look at me. His features were still striking, sharp, clean-cut, and in that moment, they overlapped with the younger boy I once knew. He frowned slightly, a rare trace of impatience in his voice. Go home on your own. She's drunk. When I didn't answer, he glanced at me again, this time his voice colder. Don't be so delicate. You weren't like this before. And with that, he got into the car and drove off, his taillights quickly vanishing down the nearly empty road. Right. I wasn't like this before. I stood there for a long moment, trying to remember. Yes, from the very beginning of our relationship, even after marriage, it had always been me taking the initiative. He'd never once believed that I would walk away from him. Never thought I had it in me. Never thought I'd be willing to. I looked down and started counting on my fingers. From the moment I first liked him, chased him, dated him almost 10 years. Married for 4. He had taken up half my life. Chapter 3. It was late, and we were far from the city center. I tried calling a ride for a long time, but no luck. In the end, I walked home, nearly an hour on foot, alone. The only thing I regretted was not driving my own car tonight. Halfway through the walk, it started snowing, soft, whispering flurries dusting my coat. It was cold. When I finally pushed open the door to our home, darkness and silence greeted me. Damn, it felt even colder inside. I clutched my aching stomach, the dull pain pulsing, and stumbled toward the bedroom. Fumbling in the dark for the light switch, I nearly knocked over a painting hanging on the wall. The light snapped on. It was too bright, too harsh. I squinted, eyes adjusting, and looked up at the painting. I had framed and hung it myself. Clean glass, carefully dusted. Inside the frame was Stanley. It was back in 7th grade. We sat next to each other, and one day while he was napping, I secretly sketched him, trying to capture his expression, his posture. In the drawing, his eyelashes were long and delicate like butterfly wings, brushing the soft morning light coming in from the window. He looked like he was dreaming of butterflies, maybe, something light and fluttering. Back then, while he slept, I dared to touch the tip of his nose. But I hadn't noticed the ink still on my fingers. The moment I touched him, a dark smudge appeared on his nose. While I was panicking about how to wipe it off, Stanley had woken up. Later, when he saw what I had done, my masterpiece, he was uncharacteristically annoyed. He flicked my forehead with a finger and said, "Troublemaker." I held my forehead, feigning hurt, but the corners of my lips were already lifting in smug triumph. Chapter 4. Just as I was thinking about all that, my phone buzzed. I picked it up. It was a message from my best friend. "Charlie, are you okay?" I scrolled up in our chat history and saw the videos she had sent me a few days ago. Ever since I met Stanley, I had always thought he was just the quiet, serious type. From dating to 4 years of marriage, his emotions were always calm, like still water. Whether it was our wedding anniversary or any holiday, he never showed much excitement or joy. I thought that was just who he was. Until I saw the videos my best friend sent me. That was when I realized he wasn't emotionless, and he wasn't unromantic. He just gave all his gentleness and smiles to someone else. They walked together, traveled together, checked into a hotel together. I watched the videos over and over, and honestly, I barely recognized the man in them. Turns out he could thoughtfully pick food out for someone. His eyes could be filled with tenderness when looking at someone. He could gently stroke someone's hair, let her rest her head on his lap. And then there was the final video. It was taken 6 months ago, the day Stanley officially started keeping Sandra as his mistress. They were kissing beneath the bauhinia tree just outside our old high school, the same tree under which I once confessed my feelings to him. My best friend is a teacher at that school. That night, she happened to be working late. As she was leaving the building, she saw them and hid to record the video in secret. No one from our school days knew that Stanley and I got married. We never held a wedding banquet. He thought it was too much of a hassle, and I'd always been afraid of those fussy formalities. In the end, it was just a quiet dinner between our two families. My best friend had known Sandra for years too. She debated for a long time before finally sending me those videos a few days ago. And that's when I finally remembered what happened 6 months ago. Stanley had been in a noticeably bad mood around that time. Thinking back now, it must have been because he'd heard Sandra was getting married. After graduation, Sandra didn't have it easy. Her family brought her a lot of trouble and burdens. Eventually, her parents forced her to marry a wealthy heir. He adored her, but she didn't feel the same way. On the wedding day, Sandra ran. She ran straight to Stanley. No wonder that day, right after his phone rang, Stanley left without even cutting my birthday cake. "Just eat the cake yourself," he'd said, rushing out the door. I had thought it was an emergency at work. But no, it was Sandra. In the video, when Stanley first saw Sandra, he looked cold and distant. "Weren't you supposed to be getting married?" Sandra rarely cried. But that day, she must have been at her breaking point. She grabbed Stanley's arm and sobbed, pouring her heart out. "I didn't go. I don't want to get married." She had run from her wedding. She had too many feelings bottled up and didn't know who else to turn to. The first person she thought of was him. Stanley didn't respond. He didn't say a word. After a moment, when Sandra saw that he remained silent, she turned to leave. "Fine, I'll just go ahead and get married then." But Stanley's expression suddenly changed. "Don't you dare." He took a few quick steps forward and pulled her into his arms from behind, pinning her beneath the bauhinia tree and kissing her. Later, he said, "50,000 a month. I'll take care of you." Sandra was furious. She raised her hand, as if to slap him. "Stanley! You're crossing the line." But in the end, her hand didn't come down. Her expression turned into something closer to humiliation. She probably really needed the money. Someone in her family seemed to be sick. And that was how Stanley began to keep her as his mistress. But the way he treated her afterward was far from how one treats a typical lover. The earlier videos my best friend sent me were all ones she had captured by chance. Sandra's family lived near the school, so my friend often ran into her, and also ran into Stanley meeting her. Chapter 5. After watching all the videos, a wave of nausea surged up from my stomach. I felt awful. I rushed to the bathroom and vomited. In a daze, a memory came back to me. For years ago, I was the one who proposed to Stanley. I had thought he would reject me. But he said yes. Only recently did I realize, just 2 days before I proposed to him, I had heard that Sandra had a new boyfriend and was about to get engaged. Who could have predicted they'd break up just 6 months later? I staggered out of the bathroom. It was late at night, and I was exhausted, but I couldn't fall asleep. I kept tossing and turning. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat alone by the bay window, staring out at the neon-lit night, listening to the quiet ticking of the clock. Stanley didn't come home that night. Not that this was the first time. I used to think he was just a workaholic and always went to bed early myself. But as the sky began to lighten and the faint glow of dawn crept through the window, I heard the door open. Stanley walked in and looked surprised to find me still awake. I turned to look at him. He didn't say anything. His expression was calm, too calm. If I hadn't seen the passionate way he kissed her, I would have believed this was just his usual demeanor. He glanced at me and turned to walk away. That's when I saw the faint, strawberry-colored bite marks on his neck. I slowly got up. Maybe it was the snow outside making everything feel colder, but my heart had gone eerily quiet, like all the emotion had been drained out of me. Only a faint, thread-thin ache remained, tugging gently somewhere deep inside. Stanley. He stopped in his tracks. I shifted my numb shoulders slightly, and my voice carried a soft sigh that I hadn't even realized was there. Let's get a divorce. When the words left my mouth, Stanley didn't react. I didn't know whether he had heard me. Or simply chose not to. He calmly changed his clothes as usual, unhurried and composed. It wasn't until he reached the doorway that he suddenly paused, as if he had misheard something. What did you just say? One hand was still tying his necktie as he turned to look at me. I kept my eyes on the window, silent for a moment. Then I slowly took off the wedding ring on my right hand and tossed it onto the table. Did you hear me clearly this time? The diamond ring sparkled with dazzling brilliance, like something out of a dream. Over all these years of marriage, I had hardly ever taken it off. But Stanley had never worn his. Just like with everything I valued, he had never treasured any of it. As the crisp sound of the ring landing echoed through the room, there was finally a subtle flicker in Stanley's gaze. But it passed in an instant. He finished tying his tie and frowned slightly. Stop acting spoiled. I've got a lot of work today. I'm heading to the office. He pushed open the door and left. Only then did a wave of exhaustion finally begin to hit me. I turned and collapsed onto the bed. The blanket, untouched all night, had absorbed a kind of bone-deep cold. Even wrapped in it, I didn't feel warm at all. Oh, Stanley. I let out a small laugh and shook my head. Was it that I had stayed frozen in place? Or had he simply forgotten how to move forward? Had he forgotten I was no longer that young girl? No longer someone who had the courage and patience to chase after him at all costs. Chapter 6. I left the house. It wasn't until evening that my best friend messaged me. He and Sandra are sitting by the bauhinia tree outside the school. I drove there. After getting out of the car, I didn't walk directly over to them. Instead, I stood not far off to their right, quietly watching. Sandra didn't seem to have changed much over the years. She still had that girlish charm, playful and sweet when she spoke. They were sitting on a bench, with rows of withered winter trees behind them. Stanley looked a little irritated. He kept checking his phone, staring at it for a while, then putting it away. After a bit, he pulled out his phone again. This time, he hesitated, then began typing on the screen. My phone vibrated. I pulled it out. It was a message from him on WeChat. What are you doing? I stared at those words for a long time, before a laugh escaped me. And then it hit me, this was the first time he had ever texted me first. Back then, almost every day, it was always me who found time to message him. I would share all sorts of interesting little things, only to receive a bland in return. I got used to thinking that's just how he was. Looking back now, it's honestly laughable. After he got involved with Sandra, my best friend sent me videos. He talked more to her in those clips than he had to me in all the years we'd been married. I didn't reply to his message. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and finally walked over to them. Hearing footsteps, Stanley looked up. For a brief moment, I thought he might show some panic at being caught cheating, but to my surprise, his first reaction was to reach out and shield Sandra. The astonishment in his eyes flickered only briefly before his expression returned to calm, like a still lake. As if he was certain I wouldn't react. Or maybe, all those years of me chasing him without hesitation had made him believe that I would never be able to leave him. Sandra sat beside him, clearly ill at ease, her eyes flitting nervously toward me. I ignored her. From my bag, I took out the divorce papers and handed them to him. Take a look. If everything looks fine, let's just sign it. Stanley accepted the papers, and when he saw the words printed on them, the calm in his eyes finally began to crack ever so slightly, confusion, disbelief creeping in. I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned and headed back to my car. Think it over. Look carefully. Then call me. I opened the car door, sat inside, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Stanley suddenly get to his feet and take a few steps in my direction. But as I turned the corner, he disappeared from view. Chapter 7. When I got home, I lay on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. After staring for a long time, my eyes grew tired, and I closed them. And the moment I did, I remembered the day I confessed to him in our second year of high school. I'd been surrounded by a group of excited friends, all teasing and cheering me on. I was so nervous, I couldn't see anyone else but him. My best friend stood beside me, giggling as she filmed the whole confession. All I remember was him saying one word, okay. Just recently, I stumbled upon that old video again. And among the crowd in the background, I spotted Sandra. Right before Stanley responded to my confession, he looked up, right in her direction. When he finally gave his answer, Sandra lowered her eyes and turned away. Now that I think about it, just before I confessed to him, Sandra had started dating the most popular guy from the class next door. At that thought, I gave a bitter little smile, tossed my phone aside, and felt a heavy pressure building in my chest, like it was stuffed with cotton. So all along, I had been her replacement. Just a shield he used to spite her. Like a clown, I orbited around him, only to realize in the end that this whole performance had always been a one-woman show. No wonder, even though we never broke up after getting together, his indifference made our classmates think we'd split long ago. I took a deep breath, ready to cast away the tangled mess of thoughts in my head, when suddenly my phone started ringing. At first, I didn't even realize it was mine. Because the custom ringtone I had set for him had never rung before. I let it ring for a while before finally opening my eyes and reaching for the phone to answer. I didn't say anything. I just waited quietly for him to speak. Stanley's voice came through. Why aren't you at home? I looked around at the apartment I was in now, then glanced at the time on the screen. 6:30 p.m. So he actually went home. How long had it been since he'd come home this early? Rare, indeed. I lowered my gaze. My right hand, now bare without a ring, unconsciously tapped against the table. Have you made up your mind? If so, just sign the papers. Let me know when you're free so we can go to the Civil Affairs Bureau together. On the other end, Stanley took a deep breath and spoke in a lowered voice. Are you throwing a tantrum because of Sandra? I paused, gripping the phone tighter. My voice turned cold. Shouldn't I be angry, Stanley? From the time I started chasing him until now, all these years, I had never spoken to him in this tone. I had always spoken softly, never once raising my voice. He seemed stunned into silence. I tapped my fingers gently against the table. Or do you think I should smile and bless you too as you play house right in front of me? Am I supposed to be happy? Or maybe just hold it in, endure it? Because from beginning to end, I've always been the one catering to you. So whoever falls in love first is destined to be beneath the other, is that it? Do you think I don't have a heart? I walked to the window and looked out at the night skyline. You don't need to pretend anymore, pretend to live with me every day like you're content. Just sign the papers. Let's go our separate ways. After my long outburst, there was a prolonged silence on the other end. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard his voice again, taut and laced with a rare trace of nervousness. Who said I agreed to the divorce? Where are you right now? When I heard that last question, an ache bloomed in my chest, bitter and ridiculous. It was absurd that the first time I ever heard something remotely like concern from him was now, when we'd already come to this point. I replied. The night is long. I might as well look around and see where I can find a pretty boy to play with. And with that, I hung up and tossed my phone onto the bed. I lay down and stared up at the ceiling. This apartment was still quite new. It was the place Stanley and I had first moved into together. I had loved it here. When you opened the windows, you could see a vast, beautiful view. But we didn't live here long. Soon after, Stanley said he didn't like it, so we moved to the place we're living in now. Thinking about it now, it wasn't that he didn't like it here. It's just that the other place was closer to where Sandra lived. Chapter 8. It wasn't until the next day, when I turned my phone back on, that I realized Stanley had been looking for me the entire night. My screen was flooded with dozens of missed calls from him and an overwhelming number of messages. If it had been before, I would have been overjoyed by this kind of urgency. But even though he had spent the whole night trying to reach me, he still had no idea where I was. If it were the other way around, if Stanley had gone missing, so long as I wanted to find him, I could have tracked him down in no time. I knew everything about him, his preferences, his favorite places, which of his friends I could go through if I needed to reach him. But Stanley was different. Maybe it was only last night, in the midst of searching, that he finally realized he had no way of getting to me. He had never cared enough to know anything about me. He didn't know where I liked to go. He didn't know which friends of mine he could contact. Ridiculous, isn't it? We've known each other for over 10 years, and even though I'm his wife, I bet he knows less about me than he does about a colleague who joined his company 6 months ago. He knows nothing. Absolutely nothing. Eventually, I sent him a message. Let me know once you've signed, or if you're ready to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. To think we're husband and wife, yet we've grown this distant. After washing up, I headed to the office. It wasn't until evening that Stanley finally found me. I figured he probably only knew where I worked because he scrolled through our old chat history. When Stanley arrived, I was just about to get off work. But the moment I saw him walk in, I suddenly didn't feel like leaving anymore. I lowered my head and continued typing on my keyboard. Honestly, staying focused on work wasn't such a bad thing. Stanley walked straight over to me. His voice was low. Charlie. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard him call me by my name like that. For a split second, it felt like I'd been transported back to our younger years, when everything was still fresh and full of possibility. A sudden sting rose to my nose, but I kept typing, pretending I hadn't heard him. Around me, colleagues began glancing curiously at Stanley. A few of the fresh-out-of-college interns even sneakily pulled out their phones to snap pictures of the handsome stranger. The colleague sitting next to me nudged me with a smile and asked, Charlie, is that your boyfriend? Stanley clearly heard it. His expression stiffened slightly, then he stepped closer and said, She's my wife. My outspoken colleague blurted in surprise. Oh wow, you're married. Stanley's face darkened further. He leaned down and asked me, Aren't you off work? I came to take you home. It was the end of the workday, most of the office had already emptied out, with only a couple of people still working overtime. My fingers paused on the keyboard for a second, then resumed tapping away. I'm working late tonight. Not going back early. Those were the exact words he used to say to me in the past. I had assumed, with Stanley's usual cold demeanor, that he would just turn around and leave. But to my surprise, he pulled out the chair next to me and sat down. I'll wait for you. Just like how I used to wait for him, whether he was on cleaning duty or doing anything else, I would always be there when he turned around. I stared at the screen, my voice laced with sarcasm. What are you even doing now? To him, our marriage should have been a burden, shouldn't it? Wasn't being with me far less joyful than being with Sandra? So why was he dragging things out and refusing to divorce now? I didn't understand him. And I didn't want to think about it anymore. I had done enough thinking, during countless nights when I woke up alone in bed. Thought so much I became anxious, exhausted, and smaller than dust. And now that I think about it, while I tossed and turned through those sleepless nights, he was probably in someone else's arms, sleeping soundly. Stanley didn't respond. He just sat beside me quietly for an hour, then got up and left. I didn't even lift my eyes. I knew he never had patience for me. But unexpectedly, a while later, Stanley came back with dinner. Eat something. When I opened the box, it was sweet and spicy. I gave it a glance, picked it up, and handed it to a colleague next to me. The colleague happily accepted it. Stanley's face darkened a little more. Charlie, stop being childish. My colleague glanced between the two of us, puzzled. Charlie, aren't you the one who hates sweet food and can't eat spicy stuff? Stanley froze. I answered slowly.
Yeah.
Because the one who liked sweet and spicy food was him. So in the past, I had pretended to like it too. Chapter 9. Stanley started acting like the high school version of me. He suddenly became attentive, reaching out to me, looking for me, just like I once had chased after him. But I grew more and more distant. I stopped going home early. We still lived separately. Until one day, when I opened the door to my apartment and caught the scent of food wafting from the kitchen. I froze, then walked inside. The dining table was covered with dishes he had prepared, neatly arranged, still steaming with delicious aroma. None of them were spicy. Under the warm yellow glow of the lights, his face looked softer somehow. It was like the cozy little home I had once dreamed of. He had finally remembered that the two of us had lived in this apartment together before. When Stanley saw me, he untied his apron. Come eat. I glanced at the table in silence, then walked into the living room. I already ate out. His hand, holding the serving spoon, paused midair. I no longer had the energy to care about his every move or to guess at his every thought like I used to. I went to tidy up my room, pulled a book from the shelf, and read quietly by myself. Stanley didn't make any noise either. Slowly, I almost forgot there was another person in the apartment. It wasn't until I finished showering and returned to my room, slipped off my shoes, and lay down on the bed with heavy eyelids, that I suddenly realized someone was beside me. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, the presence felt utterly unfamiliar. There had never been a time when Stanley went to bed earlier than I did. Maybe I'd grown used to falling asleep alone, because when Stanley wrapped his arms around me from behind, my entire body tensed like stone. His warm breath brushed my ear, and his low voice flowed like rich, intoxicating liquor, quietly persuasive. Let's talk again about the situation with Sandra. That one sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over my head. So even now, at this moment, he still couldn't let go of her. Talk? Talk about what? I slowly pried his hands off me. There's nothing left to talk about. Chapter 10. I started to become like the old Stanley, coming home late, or even spending the night at my best friend's place, just so I wouldn't have to see him. Meanwhile, he began returning home early and often, paying closer and closer attention to me, just like I used to chase after him. He kept stalling the divorce, always finding new reasons not to sign the papers. But I wasn't in a hurry. In fact, I was willing to wait, to see how he would go about it chasing me. To watch him try again and again to surprise me, to bring warmth into my life, only to walk away disappointed each time. Watching him now, I suddenly understood something. So this was what I had been like when I chased him. Stanley was even more emotionally distant than I had been. Back then, when I was after him, the walls I ran into, there were far too many. I started to wonder. How had I managed to keep chasing him for so long? Lowering myself to the point of invisibility. To the dust. Maybe that was why he had thought I was dispensable, cheap and easy to toss aside. I thought about it, gently swirled the wine in my glass, and gave a soft laugh. All the things that come too easily in this world are always taken for granted. Charlie, look. There's a cute guy over there. My best friend nudged me. He's looking this way. Wait, Charlie, is he looking at you? In the neon haze of the bar, I spotted a delicate figure. The young man turned his head. He had a gentle, snow-pale face, with a touch of youthful innocence and quiet elegance. In just one glance, I was entranced. He looked so much like the Stanley from years ago. I was so lost in thought, I didn't even notice the young man parting the crowd and walking toward me. It wasn't until he stood right in front of me that he, a bit shyly, took out his phone and asked if he could have my contact information. My best friend smirked beside me and gave me a little nudge. Told you. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. I always seemed to attract the type of boys who were like eager little puppies, sweet, youthful, and full of admiration. Before I could answer, someone suddenly grabbed my wrist roughly from behind. A voice spoke through clenched teeth. Charlie. I turned around. Stanley stood there, holding an enormous bouquet of vivid red roses, their fragrance overwhelming. He tugged my hand toward him and slipped a diamond ring, gleaming coldly, onto my finger. But my hand had long been bare. Stanley gave the young man a dark, heavy look, then turned those same eyes, sharper and colder, toward me. I raised an eyebrow slightly. What are you doing? What am I doing? He leaned in close to my face, barely restraining his anger as he said. It's our wedding anniversary. That caught me off guard. Since when did you care about things like anniversaries? I laughed. He had never shown up for a single wedding anniversary. There was always work, or some other excuse. Stanley froze. After a moment, he silently shoved the massive bouquet of roses into my arms. Let's go home. Home. I looked down at the bouquet, still wet with dew, then calmly tossed it into the nearby trash can. Stanley didn't react in time to stop me. He just turned his head to look at me, his expression unreadable. My best friend leaned over, seizing the moment. Charlie's allergic to pollen. Didn't you know? I pulled my hand free from his grasp, avoiding his eyes that flickered with shock, then dimmed with defeat. Chapter 11. I didn't pressure Stanley to sign the divorce papers every day. I didn't make scenes either. But after chasing me for 6 months, Stanley finally gave up in despair and agreed to sign. I knew it. Watching someone treat you with indifference every day. Watching all your passion get snuffed out over and over again. Even if it's just in small ways. Eventually, each one becomes a straw that breaks the camel's back. The more I watched him, the more I saw the old me. When I was younger, I really had the energy and the fearless spirit to keep going no matter what, to be endlessly persistent. But if it were me now, I probably wouldn't last even half a year. The day we signed the divorce agreement, we did it at home. I was much calmer than I had imagined, like all the crashing waves had passed, leaving behind only a silent, icy sea. But Stanley had been drinking heavily. The strong scent of alcohol clung to him. And I knew he had always disliked drinking. I walked into the room and saw the photo frames hanging on the wall. There were 2 of them. One was a portrait I had drawn of Stanley. The other was our high school graduation photo, something Stanley had hung himself. I used to think he put that graduation photo up because, in the picture, I was standing just 1 row below and directly in front of him. But now, as I looked at it closely, really looked at it, I realized that Stanley's eyes, even in that frozen moment, were clearly looking at someone else. Sandra. If I had never been part of their story, perhaps theirs would have been a beautiful tale of mutual affection and destined reunion. I looked away and turned to the drawing beside it, the one I'd done of Stanley. I reached out to take it down. But as soon as I touched it, the frame, poorly secured, came crashing down. As it fell, my fingers twitched, as if I meant to catch it. But then, I withdrew my hand. Suddenly, a hand lunged from behind me, trying to catch it. But it barely brushed past his fingertips. And finally, the frame crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces. A shard of glass sliced across his fingertip, quickly staining red. Stanley didn't even flinch. He bent down, trying to pick up the broken frame and the torn drawing. "Why didn't you catch it?" His voice was slightly hoarse. "Weren't you the one who drew this of me?" So, he knew. I had always thought he didn't. That painting had been hanging in our room for years. He'd always walked past it without sparing a glance, never once asking about it. Now, the broken glass shards were cutting into his fingers, slowly dyeing the floor red. I grabbed his hand. "Don't clean it up. What's broken is broken. Even if you piece it back together, it'll never be the same." Was I heartbroken? Was I hurting because he was now the one bleeding and covered in cuts? No. I was hurting for the version of me from before. If only I had known that love must have boundaries. I wouldn't be so exhausted now. Just by hearing the word love again. The movement of the glass shards stopped. He slowly looked up at me. His long, beautiful eyes met mine. It was the first time I'd ever seen him wear that expression. His eyes looked like shattered glass on the floor, scattered fragments that could never be reassembled into what once was. He slowly reached out a hand toward me, trying to touch my face. "Let's not get divorced. Please? Can we try again? Start over?" I avoided his hand and walked to the table. Then, I picked up the divorce papers and signed them. I shook my head. Chapter 12. After finalizing the divorce with Stanley, I suddenly felt lighter. When we stepped out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I walked east. He walked west. I didn't look back. Not until I got into the car did I notice him. Standing not far from where we had parted, staring at me blankly. Looking just like a lost child. I turned my gaze away from him, stepped on the gas, and slowly drove off. Finally, for once. It wasn't me chasing behind his back, watching his figure disappear. Chapter 13. I knew Stanley would end up with Sandra. Even during the time we were arguing over the divorce. He never once said he was going to let her go. So when the news of their relationship going public came out, I wasn't surprised. But what did surprise me was how quickly they broke up. It happened less than a week after Stanley and I divorced. What was supposed to be the long-awaited transition from a secret affair to something open and real turned out to be so short-lived. My best friend sent me a screenshot of Sandra's social media post. Sandra had written, "So it turns out, you were just chasing the thrill of the forbidden. If I'd known that, I wish you had just told me earlier." His disinterest came so fast. So fast, it shocked everyone. After that day, I stopped keeping tabs on Stanley's every move. But news about him would still reach me, trickling through mutual friends. I heard that Stanley had the broken photo frame repaired and now keeps it on his desk at work. Sometimes staring at it in a daze. The wedding ring I pawned off. He still wears it on his finger. And one day, when the snow was falling thick outside, I pulled open the curtains from my high-rise window and saw him standing alone under a street lamp, wearing a gray trench coat, staring quietly at the nearly empty road. Just like back in high school, when I waited alone for him in a snowstorm to surprise him on his birthday. Like a fool, I drew the curtains shut again. Pretended I never saw him. I began to grow used to a life without Stanley. The house, once feeling vast and lonely every time I came home, now looked warm and tidy, carefully arranged by me. I could cook the food I liked. No longer needing to consider what he preferred or what he refused to eat. I could sprawl across the entire soft bed without restraint. No longer waking in the middle of the night to feel the empty space beside me. Another summer came. I packed my backpack and traveled to many places. Sometimes with friends. Sometimes alone. I saw the deep blue of the ocean. The vast emptiness of deserts. Watched eagles soar through the skies. Climbed to the tops of mountains to catch the sunrise and sunset. Stood before snowy peaks and scooped up a handful of cold, clean snow. These were all the places I had once mentioned to Stanley, again and again. Places I wanted us to go see together. But he always had some excuse. Too busy. Too tired. And yet somehow, he had time to go with someone else. My close friends say Stanley's different now. One of them, who works in the same company as him, even messaged me. I really think he regrets it. He still wears the ring. Hasn't been close to any other woman. Maybe you two could think about getting back together? I received the message while I was watching the sunrise from the top of a mountain. I lowered my head and typed back. No. Not everything deserves forgiveness. And not every beautiful view needs to be shared by two.